Hello, and welcome to our two-part webcast on working together to solve problems, which will teach you the skills to work with your children to reduce the conflict that inevitably arises when raising children and setting limits. Learning the skill of problem exploration will help you to deal with some of the struggles you have with your children, help your children to feel that they can contribute to solutions to problems rather than seeing themselves as being the problem, and can strengthen the relationship you have with your children. In this first section, we are focusing on the planning you need to do before you engage your child. The second section will examine the steps to follow once you involve your child. As we just mentioned, this first section will focus on the planning you need to do before involving your child. Like the old adage, measure twice, cut once, we believe that taking the time to think about the problem will make the process of solving problems with your children more productive. These preparatory steps include checking your attitudes toward problems, defining the problem, deciding if the issue is a challenging norm, determining who owns the problem, and considering how acceptable the behavior is. We will examine each of these points in turn. First, take a moment to consider what words come to mind when you hear the word problem. This can include thoughts, feelings, or attitudes. You can put this presentation on hold while you write down your answers. The following is a list of words that we have compiled from numerous workshops with parents. As you look over this list, you can compare it with your own, and it can be interesting to see the variety of responses and surprising to see that other people have a very different perspective from your own. Our attitudes about problems can become self-fulfilling. If we believe that problems are solvable and that we're capable of solving them, there is a greater likelihood we will persist when confronted with a problem, and therefore a greater likelihood that we will find a solution. In fact, confronting and effectively dealing with problems actually has benefits to our children. Please look over the following list and check the one statement that accurately represents the benefit of problems to our children. We'll give you a moment to look this over. As you can see, the correct answer is all of the above are benefits of problems. By embracing problems, our children actually grow and develop. With this positive view of problems, we can now begin to think about the specifics of the issues we need to or want to address. To bring this process to life, we're going to use the following scenario to highlight each of the steps.
The problem that we're using is that 11-year-old Connor was riding his bicycle around the block after school, but he didn't come home in a half an hour to begin his homework as he had agreed to do. He has practice that night, so time is limited. This has become a frequent scenario in their home, and his mother is frustrated, upset, and angry.
Before we ever speak to our children, we need to spend some time getting clear about the situation and defining the problem. We need to be objective, put boundaries around the problem, and quantify the magnitude of the problem. So, for example, how often does it happen? Is it daily or only occasionally? Under what circumstances? So, in this scenario, is Connor usually punctual or is it part of a greater problem? And to what extent? Is he usually late by 30 minutes or more?
In our scenario, the mom determined that Connor has been late 4 out of the last 5 times he was riding his bicycle after school, once by only 5 minutes and 3 times by 20 to 30 minutes.
Now that the mother has quantified the problem, she can step back and ask herself, is this still a problem that I need to address? And in this case, her answer is yes. You can also decide if a situation is truly a problem or if it is a challenging norm. There are certain behaviors that may be aggravating, frustrating for us as parents, but are typical for our child's age, and usually with time they'll be outgrown. For example,
bathroom language of 4 and 5-year-olds. Not sharing is common of 2-year-olds all the way through age 5 or 6. Pilfering among 5 and 6-year-olds. Being moody for a 7-year-old, needing autonomy and privacy for adolescents.
We can work to teach our children to move beyond these behaviors, but it is still helpful to realize that the behaviors are typical and will probably go away on their own in time without direct intervention on our part. This is where knowledge of child development can be helpful. You can understand what behaviors are part of a child just doing his job of a developmental task and not be quite so upset about it. If you were to look up typical behaviors for 11-year-olds, you would find that Connor is exhibiting many typical traits as shown on this screen. We'll give you a few seconds to look it over.
So back to determining if this is a problem. While the mother believes that some of it may be the result of Connor's developmental stage, she has decided that it is still something that needs to be addressed.
There are times when a parent may choose not to address the issue. For some people, for example, bathroom talk, which is a challenging norm for 4 to 5-year-olds, would be just that, a challenging norm that they would not feel the need to address or do anything about. They would just wait it out, and knowing that it would eventually go away on its own. For other people, though, they may want to address the issue as a problem. Parents must next decide who owns the problem. And by this we mean who is the person who's really bothered by a particular situation or whose needs are not being met. For example, a child who's playing ball in the living room usually has no problem with what he's doing, but the parent might, so the parent owns that problem.
When something our child is doing directly affects us in a negative way, then we own the problem, and it becomes our responsibility to do something about it. Our child owns the problem when it's something that only affects him and does not directly affect us. For example, a child who wants to go to a movie that has a rating that is above their age, perhaps a PG-13 for a 10-year-old. That is really the child's problem, not ours, especially if we have already set the limits about the types of movies they can see. In that case, the best way that we can support our child is to listen and acknowledge his frustrations and disappointments. We really don't need to do anything more.
Unfortunately, parents often take on the problems of their children because they feel bad for them and they want to make their frustrations go away. So they quickly jump in to solve things for them because they don't like to hear the kids being upset, when actually it is the responsibility of the child to solve the problem or learn to deal with it.
Sometimes both parents and children own a problem when it is something that directly affects both of them in a negative way. For example, a child who is bored chooses to amuse himself by tackling the puppy. The child has a problem because he needs to find a constructive way to entertain himself, and the parent has a problem because the puppy needs protection.
You can see that by deciding first whose problem it is, we can then set a course for how to tackle the situation. If the child owns the problem, we can support him, but we don't necessarily have to take action to make him feel better. If we own at least part of the problem, then we can empower ourselves with this process to help work towards an acceptable solution.
Going back to our situation with Connor's coming home late when he's riding his bicycle around the neighborhood, who do you think owns the problem? The mom, Connor, or both? It's really the mother's problem, although if she yells at Connor or if he runs out of time to complete his homework before practice, then it may become his problem as well. Since the mom owns at least part of the problem, it's still a problem that she needs to address.
The last factor to consider in helping determine your course of action is to think about how acceptable or unacceptable a behavior is. What one parent finds annoying or unacceptable, another person might not. For example, one parent might be bothered by a child not making his bed, and another parent may not care. Also, there may be times when something feels like a problem to you, and at other times it does not. For example, if you're pressed for time, you might get annoyed at your child not being quick about deciding what she wants to wear for school. Yet if you have plenty of time, you might feel more relaxed about this. Having these different reactions is all right. It's not realistic to think that we can be totally consistent all of the time, but we can explain to our children why we are reacting differently to the same behavior on their part. Some behaviors might be acceptable for a child of one age, while not acceptable for a child of a different age. For example, if you finish dinner and it's time to clear up, and your toddler reaches into the leftover mashed potatoes and begins to squeeze them, you might have one reaction. Yet if your 8-year-old does the same thing, you might have quite a different reaction.
In the situation with Connor, you can ask yourselves, would it be acceptable to me if my child came home late? Once again, this mother asks herself if it's still a problem, and again her answer is yes.
To summarize, before deciding to use a problem exploration process, you need to check your attitudes toward problems, clarify the situation, determine whether the situation or behavior is the result of a challenging norm, that it is you who owns at least part of the problem, and that you cannot accept the behavior.
In our situation, Connor's mother thought that she and Connor could find a solution to this problem, that it was a problem worth addressing, that this issue was not going to clear up on its own as a challenging norm would, that she owns at least part of the problem, and that she cannot accept the behavior.
Now that our parent is prepared, it is time to involve the child. We will discuss the steps to follow in Part 2 of our Working Together with Our Children to Solve Problems. Thank you for joining us.